Hey, welcome back! And I need to ask you a very important question. Are you excited for the 11.0.7 patch? I might disappoint you. So the main idea of the patch is another mini zone we can grind dailies in and do rares and activities, all to facilitate the new ring, which will boost our power. How high, you ask? Well, okay. I do have to say that I'm about to shit on the content hard, and I want to preface a couple of things beforehand. First, from everything we know about the Siren Isle, and especially the new ring, it is supposed to be a big power upgrade for players to farm, and supposedly it is going to carry us through the expansion. Now, this last part is very relative, and I still have my doubts about it, but I went into the PTR and tested the content with that premise in mind. Second, this isn't a diss on the devs, however insincere that sounds. The zone is actually cool, and for 11.07 content, it's fine. It's new stuff to do. With that being said, thirdly, I am judging this a bit more harshly because we had the exact same content in Dragonflight patch 10.07 that brought a new mini zone with mini activities, quests and rares that all had a purpose to fuel this new power ring, which was supposed to be giga good for everyone. And it wasn't, and it was relatively boring. Because that was already done and tested, I have higher expectations about Circe's circlet ring. That out of the way, there are two main things in terms of gearing that are coming in 11.07, so let's start with the super ring. Terrible, at least as a first impression. The caveat being that things will change or the patch will flop, or maybe stuff was bugged for me and wasn't that impressive. But let me tell you what this ring is exactly and why it sucks. For now. You acquire the ring naturally progressing through the mini story here, and it just has stamina and 3 sockets. Because this was PTR, there was a vendor there that sold the gems for the sockets and an item to raise their eye level of the ring, which normally you acquire by just doing the daily and weekly content of the Siren Isle zone. The PTR only had it until 639 item level, and its stamina was the same as a regular ring. Not sure what this means to you, but when you are telling me the ring is supposed to be an auto lock-in, insta-bis ring for an entire patch, let alone the rest of the expansion, I am either looking at a higher item level, which I believe is the more boring way to approach it, or a bigger chunk of stats. But it is not about the stats, guys. It is about the gems. So let's see what gems we have. Without going into all the details, the Dragonflight version had the gems that proc the damage, zaps, dots, heals, and other trinkets like effects for the Onyx Amulet that just synergize well with each other. These new gems do the same fucking thing. Hold up. I know people memed it as a copy pasta from the same ring. Surely we don't just have the exact same style of gems. First off, let's look at the old gems for the Onyx Amulet, the ring we had in Dragonflight. Here we have a total of 24 gems split in between 7 types, while the Circe circle has a total of 12 gems split between 3 types. Okay, it's not the end of the world here. These 3 types of gems are essentially the colors you need to fit in your ring. There is Thunder for yellow, Sea for blue, and Wind for pink? Okay. What types of effects can you expect from these gems? Well, let's look at the most basic ones first, because each color will give you secondary stats. From Thunder, we have the Stormbringer's Rune Citron that gives you 568 of every secondary stat at max item level. The Sea section gives you Fathom Dweller's Rune Citron, which gives you 1635 mastery and boosts the effect of all the other gems by your level of mastery, which it currently does not. And last, the Wind slot can get you the Windsinger Rune Citron, giving you 2272 of your highest secondary stat. So that's 568 times 4 plus 1635 mastery plus 2272 highest secondary stat for a total of 6179 secondary stats, while a similar item level ring has 6131 total secondary stats. This is a bit arbitrary, but every ring in the game has the exact same total stat value with another ring if they are of the same item level. Now notice how both the regular ring and the super ring have, let's be honest, the same same exact item power, making the new ring kinda shit, since instead of having a regular ring with the stats you want, you get to build your own ring with worse stats you now have to also grind for, getting the same end result. Of course, two things to note here. One is that the mastery effect doesn't apply, either because it's not meant to or it's a bug. Let's assume it is a bug, because otherwise it would really suck for whoever thought these numbers would be fine. So my other gems are supposed to be boosted by my mastery, and I assume they would be by my raw mastery rating and not the actual total percentage, since each spec converts mastery rating into mastery percentage differently, making the value of this damage skyrocket like mad for other classes. So if the value of the other gems would be boosted by my mastery, this becomes an easy best in slot item from the sheer value of raw stats, assuming that the benefit is not, oh, I don't know, 200 extra stats, which would be nothing considering my mage really only wants haste mastery or haste versatility, with crit being close to pointless. Now we have a fat stat stick as a ring that we are right now hoping it would be a fat stat stick, because it isn't at this point. Right now this is just an average ring with worst stat distribution, since there are almost no specs that want a healthy balance of all 4 secondary stats, as opposed to just narrowing down on 2 big stats. If we go any further and try to make some other different combinations, you would soon realize there aren't that many. If we take my fire mage as an example, and I am sure your spec might be the same, for the thunder slot I don't really want the stat gem. I don't value all secondary stats the same, and I would have to trade a haste verse ring that's bis for something of lower value. So instead I have to choose one of the others. My options are Roaring War Queen Citron, that has a chance to trigger the thunder gems of 4 of my allies when I use spells and abilities. That's a neat thing, but that means I get nothing and just boosting my allies. Not really a mage choice here, but more of a healer slash support choice. That's cool, but it won't work for me. Next is Storm Sewer, which gives an absorb shield for 320,000 damage on my over 6 million HP and damage attackers back. This is clearly a tank gem, and if this doesn't proc like all the time, the absorb will be close to useless, since tanks are already rocking 10 million HP. What are they going to do with a 300k absorb shield? So I am left with Thunderlord's Crackling Citron that zaps enemies for 213k nature damage, and the way this is set up is to actually proc by quite a bit. This would actually give me trinket level damage procs, which in a vacuum is a good thing, but once again it's not free damage, since I get this instead of haste verse that would scale my own damage instead. But moving forward, it turns out I really only have one gem to get here, making all the rest pointless. The C slot is the same. Mastery was good for Sun Fury Fire Mage, but for Frostfire you want versatility instead, so no to the Mastery one. Definitely no to the Heal Your Allies one. Make the healer work for it, am I right? So I am left with Undersea Overseer Citron that does frost damage bouncing between 2 enemies. Similarly, for the wind, I will likely take Squall Sailor Citron that does damage to 5 enemies, since the legendary Skipper Citron that is supposed to proc a random other gem at 150% effectiveness does not currently work. First of all, notice how each gem is either AoE or single target, and completely terrible at what it is not. The concept of swapping gems in and out is cool, but for me there is nothing to swap in or out to. Stats is just a ring I already have, and the procs are just another trinket I already have. The only real interesting gems are the ones that proc other gems, and this has to be some quirky crazy scaling where we are in a party and all of our gems start singing a fucking orchestra of damage procs left and right, or at the end of the day this ring ends up being super terrible. In the end, this can change of course if they buff them. The devs already changed 2 of the gems since announcing this, from also having secondary stats to a totally different effect. One such example is the proc other gems at 150% effectiveness. Another is the Sea Bed Leviathan Citron that was also a secondary stat gem, to now giving over 8k stamina and making attackers take tiny little frost damage. This gem is actually the best example of how boring this ring is. Clearly this is meant for tanks or PvP. The 8k stamina barely gives you 200k HP, which for me as a mage is a tiny little bit of survivability. While for a tank it's likely nothing when they get meleeed from north of 1 million damage to 5 million HP points. These are too safe. The stats and procs are too safe. This ring should be an obvious bis, but it is not. You cannot tell how good having tiny little baby DPS procs being better than raw stats that scale into your spec is. You need a sim, you need to watch guides, or assume gems have to be bugged for how little they are actually doing. No, this is PTR and it's not really supposed to be perfect. If anything, this video might be to attract attention to the issues because 1107 ring is not it, chief. The Dragonflight one had double the number of gems to play with and so many more combinations possible, and actually interesting effects. None of those were secondary stat gems. And this is a marker of how boring the gearing system is in WoW, where secondary stats become the thing people want the most. We don't have to have double the number of gems though. Imagine if there were actually 24 gems you could play with and almost all valuable. Imagine them actually being strong and you making combinations based on the dungeon you are in, the world event you want to clear, the raid you want to smash, and the system will let you do it since swapping gems in and out does not actually destroy them, making these an ideal mini talent tree with 3 options out of 12. But it's actually 3 options out of at best 5, making over 50% of the system pointless to you. And I bet you anything tanks will also want stats and damage procs and not the absorbs and stamina ones. The whole system in the end is just as Marcelian said in our wrap-up a few weeks ago, 99% copy pasta with fewer options and more boring effects. This is a bit disappointing from what we were expecting. The saving grace for the patch would be the zone and actually the catch-up gear for your alts, which in the end is not a saving grace for your main if you just play one character or you want to constantly play and progress your own character. Doing all the content in the first day got me about 2.4k of the flame blessed iron, and one piece of gear costs 140 to 175 or 350 for a 200 of that currency. That means you can actually gear an alt with all veteran gear in one day, maybe 2. That is actually pretty good catch up, letting you skip all of those campaign rewards, green crafted gear, or world quests. Even reputation events that also give you veteran gear. And you get to choose what you want from a gear vendor, and you can essentially farm the resource with your main and send your gear to your alt. It's like Christmas for alt gearing. Why can't we just have this vendor in the game all the time? There is a very slight chance the currency is inflated on the PTR for the sake of testing, but I would be really surprised if it is, since there is not much testing into buying gear for alts. The activities in the zone are cool. You get to encounter Vrykul, Nagas and pirates, which feel more Warcrafty than what we have received in Dragonflight for sure, but they would probably get stale after a couple of days since it's pretty much most of the same thing and the zone is fairly small. But at least it's soloable, and WoW is better now solo, or so we think and say in this video right here. If you're not convinced, then click it and see if you are right.